Contarte Historias presents Sherlock, Lupin and Me. The Dark Lady by Irene Adler. Illustrations inspired by the work of Henri Toulouse-Lautrec. Chapter 3. The Ashcroft House. Sherlock Holmes's friend was a wiry boy, with a strong build, dark eyes, and black hair, like himself. He was cleaning the bottom of a rowboat moored at the end of the dock. The sun was scorching, seagulls were perching on the masts of boats, and fishermen were mending their nets to dry. Mr. Nelson's voice had faded into the blue sky, and I had eyes only for the boats bobbing slowly on the water. "Looks like we have an emergency, Lupin," Sherlock said when we reached the boat, wasting no time in greetings. The boy stopped talking the moment his eyes fell on me. To this day, I don't know if he did it simply because he saw me or because he saw me with Sherlock. At any rate, he stopped talking and stood as still as a statue of salt. "This is Irene," Sherlock introduced me. "Hello," I said. "Hola," he said. "And he's Lupin," Sherlock concluded. "Lupin?" I repeated, perplexed. "My friend isn't as tolerant of his name as I am," Sherlock explained, smiling. "How can I be? They called me Arsène." "What a name, befitting an old fool." "Much better Lupin." "Are you French?" I asked. It was a French surname. "Aha," he nodded. "And you?" "He's run away from home," Sherlock intruded, bending his knees to bend down. His legs were thin, pointed. "It's nothing serious," he added. "But you know how these things are. He prefers to keep his distance for a while," Lupin guessed. "That's it." "Let's see, have you argued with your sister?" I shook my head. "With your mother?" "It's Mr. Nelson," I answered. "But I haven't argued. I just don't want to go home right away." "Irene's on vacation," Sherlock explained. And I told him I had a friend who asks few questions. The two boys exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that means, "Then you and I talk." Sherlock shrugged his shoulders, and Lupin put down the bucket and pointed to the rope with which he had moored the ship. "Done deal," he said, "untie it and get on board. Let's go for a spin." "Do you have a bathing suit?" "No," I answered. "Then take a good look where you put your feet." The boat was rocking and it was really small, it only had 2 seats, one by the oars and one a little further on, at the bow. Aft were piled up, at the same time, ropes, pieces of net, and inlaid knickknacks that Lupin had pulled out of the sea in his dives. The two boys put me in the bow and they got to the oars. They took one each, Sherlock on the right and Lupin on the left. They made the boat glide out of the harbor with few maneuvers, rowing perfectly in rhythm, like 2 old sea dogs. "Can you find out who Mr. Nelson is?" Lupin asked me at one point. "And why is he called after the English admiral?" I didn't know exactly, and I didn't answer him at the time. Mr. Nelson had always called himself Mr. Nelson, and he had never asked me why. I had always been in the service of my mother's family, even after the Civil War, or so I thought. I looked at the port, which was receding behind the 2 oarsmen. The bow rose at each bog and then lapped against the water. Around us were other boats, much larger and imposing than ours. It was like sailing on a sea flea. We were along the promontory when I heard a cry coming from the shore, and saw seagulls flying away. Smiled. Maybe we should ask him directly. I had just recognized Mr. Nelson, who was bracing and calling to me from the street, trying to get my attention. "Miss Adler. Miss Adler. Where are you going?" Midwell new friends stopped rowing instantly, as if frightened by my mother's gigantic black servant. But I motioned for them to continue. "No, no, please. You have nothing to fear, it will do nothing to us." I raised my hand and greeted Mr. Nelson, trying to make him understand that I was all right and that he shouldn't worry. "I'll be back soon," I shouted, waving a white handkerchief. "It's okay." "I hope so," said Lupin quietly, after a second uneasy glance at my butler, "because he seems to me to be really big and rather angry." Even if I was, I said, laughing, and still waving to Mr. Nelson, who was now running along the beach in the wake of our boat. I don't think I know how to swim. What if you're wrong? My new friends asked me as they plunged their oars into the calm waves of the Atlantic. After the cape, Mr. Nelson surrendered. He stood motionless for a moment like a statue, one leg raised against the rocks and the sun reverberating in his black skull. He then returned home to report to my mother. We got into the tongue of sea between the two islands separated from the promontory where the city stood. At low tide, I was told, it was possible to reach both on foot thanks to a stone walkway that was now barely covered by the surface of the sea. Let it be clear that we did not kidnap you, remarked Lupin several times, who, of the two, seemed to me the more diligent and the more concerned at the same time, but it was you who wanted to escape. I made a gesture of indifference. Exactly. But rest assured, I'll go home later to receive the usual scolding. Usual? Sherlock repeated curiously. Yes. It's not the first time I've taken a bit of freedom. I laughed. But what's so weird about that? Well, it's not exactly normal. My mother. He's always scolded me, I answered, feeling something in my chest that suddenly oppressed him. I'm used to rapapolvos, I concluded, looking around. We had almost passed the first island, on which a large cross was erected, and were rounding the second, which housed, almost hidden in the bushes, a low, solid building. I pointed it out to my friends. What is it? A fort, Lupin replied. There's usually no one, just the French flag waving in the wind. Let's move on. The sun was burning now, and I had one hand in the water that ran alongside the hull to enjoy its coolness. I looked at the few houses among the greenery and rocks, and the even fewer people on the beach. Those were the days when it was not fashionable to go to the sea and sunbathe, and men preferred women with pale white skin to tanned ones. I scanned the rugged shoreline and asked. Where are we going? To the Ashcroft's house, Lupin replied. Are they friends of yours? I asked. He shook his head and, with his chin, pointed something at me. It's an old abandoned mansion, just down the beach. The path that leads to it is invaded by brambles, and no one usually goes. They say it's inhabited only by the restless spectre of old Ashcroft. Which, by all accounts, is nonsense, Sherlock interrupted dryly. Smiled. Lupin's words seemed to create an aura of mystery around the Ashcroft house. A halo that Sherlock, on the other hand, had wanted to erase with his blunt comment. An old uninhabited mansion, I said. Sounds interesting. It's not. Empty rooms. A lot of dust. Nothing to see, Sherlock insisted laconically. Lupin nudged him and gave me to understand that he didn't think the same way. Don't listen to him. It's a really special place. In addition, it has now become our refuge. Your refuge? When we want to get out of trouble, we got here. And what are the problems you want to get away from? I asked with great curiosity. They didn't answer me right away. And, in the time that passed, I thought they looked like brothers, but they weren't. They inadvertently exchanged continuous glances, as if to decide which secrets to share and which not. And there was something terribly fascinating in what they seemed to hide that pushed me to want to hear what they didn't say and to want to discover the reasons that, at least in my head, they had for not telling me. I felt like a thief who had to deal with a particularly complicated safe lock. Well, trouble, Lupin mumbled, it's not that we have real trouble. Normal things, Sherlock said. Like what? His brothers, for example, Lupin revealed. Do you have any siblings? I asked Sherlock. He nodded with a slanted smile. An older one than me and a younger sister. And both are an ordeal. What about you? I asked Arsène. I'm an only child, but, he waved his hands in the air, then let go and retrieved the oar with the speed of a conjurer, I have a very turbulent family on my back. You can say it out loud, Sherlock laughed. That's why, when you can't take it anymore, you take the boat and come here. Exactly, Lupin confirmed. The thought of the strange refuge of these two made me laugh. And when you're here, what do you do? Well, for starters, there are a lot of rooms to explore, Lupin said. Ashcroft's old studio, the basements, the attic. Yes, many rooms, and all empty. Sherlock sneered, earning him another nudge. And then what do you find so interesting? I can read in peace, he answered. I looked at his long, dry paddling arms and compared them to Lupin's burnished muscles. It was really hard to imagine two more different boys. Sherlock's skin was milk white, while Lupin sported a fisherman's tan. Sherlock moved stiffly, as if he had flint bones, and Lupin, on the other hand, looked like one of those nimble black African felines drawn in explorers' travel books. The beach curved long and then seemed to shrink, swallowed by vegetation. Just at the bottom of the last spit of land I saw the roof of an old house peeping out from among the low trees and rocks of the rocks. The Ashcroft house, murmured Sherlock Holmes, raising his oar. What did you think of this Sherlock, Lupin and Irene Adler audiobook? Did you like the ending? Who was your favorite character? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to our channel to not miss the next chapter. The mystery